We mentioned the story in the Gemara. The Gemara had mentioned on Boker Tov. We have clarification today for the case yesterday. Okay. We said yesterday, the Mishnah stated, the Mishnah stated if a person has a pile of hay and he cut into, and it was already a full pile of hay, and then he went ahead, let's say we said 15 feet of hay, and then you went ahead and you cut out the bottom 10 feet of the hay, right? We say that's, and then now when you do that, now you're left with now you have the sukkah, you have a nice chach, because you cut away the bottom, you have a nice opening on the bottom, and now you have walls on the side. So the Mishnah says that's not good, because when the sukkah, when the ceiling was made in a way that it was not kosher, because originally it was made as a pile, part of a big pile. But the Gemara says if you left a halal tefach, if let's say you made this pile, how'd you make it? You raised above the ground from the floor, you raised a tefach. You left a space, a height of 1 tefach, let's say between 3 and 4 inches off the ground, and this went along for 7 tvachim wide, the size of, and it was 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim, a space that when this ceiling of 1 tefach above the ground was 28 inches, let's say, by 28 inches. It was this type of ceiling off the ground, tefach off the ground, and on top of that, you piled up all this hay. So you have, good morning, Ellie. You have the Gemara's over here. You have this big pile of hay. But the difference between this case and the case of the Mishnah is that this pile of hay was piled up above the ground, above 1 tefach off the ground. There's an empty space of 1 tefach on the ground. Now, to be considered a tent, ohel, you need to have a minimum height of 1 tefach. So now, it's this. Once you created a tefach, you've made it a very small roof. A very thick roof, exactly. But I'm saying small meaning height. It's a very small in height. Once that was established, so now what you said, Dr. Navid, it's a thick roof. It's very thick schach. You have schach starting from over here, all the way, the pile of haystack, this whole pile is schach. And some of the commentators explain, as we know, in order for something to be considered schach, it has to be made to protect from the sun. So when you made this type of igloo or haystack, where you raised it above the ground, the tefach or a little or more, the purpose was you wanted the area on the bottom to be protected from the sun. The purpose was for shade purposes. Why did you have to go ahead and raise it a tefach above the ground? Just put everything directly, just pile it up directly on the ground. Why did you obviously wanted that spot to be protected from the what? From the sun, and you had it. That's why you created in that fashion. Being that's the case, now I go ahead. Now, if I go ahead and I raise the roof, meaning to say I remove a lot of the schach. I remove the bottom up, exactly. So I remove bottom, and let's say I remove 9 tvachim. Originally, it went, the ceiling was 1 tefach off the ground, and the 1 tefach off the ground, and that ceiling was from 1 tefach off the ground to 100 tvachim. Now I removed, let's say, another 9 tvachim off the ground. Now I've raised the ceiling. Now the ceiling doesn't come so far close to the ground. It's not coming one like having 1 tefach off the ground. The ceiling now, the haystack is only coming up to 10 tvachim off the ground, right? The ceiling is now only coming 10 tvachim off the ground. That's fine. Why? Because since you had a schach beforehand, when you made the pile of hay, when you placed the hay, it was raised above the ground originally, or at least a tefach above the ground. It was made originally as schach, as a roof to protect from shade. So the fact that you go ahead and you go deeper into that and you dig more and you raise the ceiling, so to speak, or you remove some of this.
How do you raise something?
You know, he raised it because you have this big arch. Good morning, Mr. Batesh.
Morning, Rabbi.
Good morning, good to see you. You have this big pile of hay. So you just have to just dig out, go from the bottom up, by digging out the, you're not raising from the height, you're just removing the lower end of the, I think you would stack hay. If you stack it, right, you pile something up the same way you can make something with an arch. You go ahead, you pile it up in a way that it goes like this with a little curve. So you originally piled it up that way with an arch, and that's the pshat in the Gemara. That's what the Gemara says. Lo shanu. Now look back in the Gemara now. Look by chodi begadish. We'll just read that line, the language of that Gemara, because we ran through it yesterday. You're at Tes Zayin Amanal. We're on 16. In the art scroll, it's 16a1 at the bottom. Hachoti begadish, right? If you went ahead and you cut into a gadish, you cut into a pile of hay. So the Mishnah says if you had a full pile of hay on the ground, it's no good if you just cut the bottom out and now you're left with 10 tefachim high ceiling because what you're doing is you're just cutting out the bottom. You're not creating, and the ceiling was not made properly originally. That's only if you don't have it. If you don't have an empty space on the bottom of this pile, the size of a tefach, that goes 28 inches by 28 inches. But if you have a halal tefach, if you have an empty space, which by 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim, how is this sukkah? That's a sukkah. So now you'll ask the question. Rashi says, "What about the walls?" It's true. The ceiling of the sukkah, you had created a ceiling earlier. The ceiling was called a sukkah. It was called a ceiling of sukkah of Succah because you originally made it a tefach above the ground, and therefore it does not ruin the sukkah. But the walls, they weren't proper walls of 10 tefachim walls, because the whole thing was just a pile of hay. So here's a full pile of hay over here with an arch, like this, but that's not a kosher wall. It's not a 10 tefachim wall. Only now that you dig out, when you dig up, and you dig up in the pit and you remove the bottom part of the haystack, which is a tefach above the ground, you dug from 1 tefach to 10 tefachim. Now, as a result of that, you've created walls. You've created walls on the side. So Rashi says that's not a problem. Good morning, because the law of Tasev, the law mina asui, is a law specific to the Succah. There's no problem if you have walls that were made not in a kosher fashion. Just like your house. If you have a case, good morning, if this building, the penthouse, a roof of a house, which the walls were not made for a sukkah, if you went in and you opened up the ceiling, you removed the ceiling, and you put schach, it's fine. Even though the walls weren't made properly, as long as the schach was made properly, because then you place the schach. When you place the schach, it was fine. It's only the placement of the schach that has to be done in a kosher, in a fashion that makes it a kosher sukkah. So therefore, that's the explanation of the Gemara. And the Gemara says, Tanya Nami Hachi. The Gemara says we have a braita that supports this ruling. That makes this distinction. If you dug into this pile of hay to make a sukkah, sukkah. We have a braita that says that if you have a pile of hay and you dug into that pile of hay, and it's a kosher sukkah. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? We learned in our Mishnah, Ein sukkah, right? We learned if you have a pile of hay piled on the ground and you go ahead and you dig the bottom part out of the pile, right? Here we have this big pile of hay, and I dig the bottom and I left the top as is. I didn't move around the top. So I didn't do an action in the schach. The schach came by itself. The ceiling came by me digging the bottom. I'm left with a ceiling, but that ceiling was not made originally kosher, because originally that ceiling was not a ceiling. Originally that ceiling was part of a big pile of hay. So we say it's not kosher. So how can we say here that it is kosher? Is that clear, everybody? So the Gemara says, Elalav Shema Mina. You have to say Rav Huna, Shema Mina. You have to say the way Rav Huna explained that the case that you'll find the Braita that says that it's kosher is talking about when it was. What do you say, Mr. Duffin? It had already a height of 1 tefach off the ground. It already was made as a sukkah. Already was made as a sukkah, meaning as a cover, as a protection, and therefore you're allowed to extend it to make that height of 10 tefachim by removing from 1 tefach to 10 tefachim up. And Ike de Ramila Mirma, some had it as a question, as the Gemara proposed the question, meaning not that Rav Huna came, as Rashi explains, not that Rav Huna came to explain the Mishnah directly, rather Rav Huna came to explain a contradiction. Meaning we had the text in our Gemara was Lo Shanu Amar Rav Huna, right? How do we open up our Gemara? Lo Amar Rav Huna, Lo Shanu. This law of the Mishnah is only talking about a specific type of case when you didn't leave an empty space of a tefach. But if you left empty tefach, then it's fine. But some have the text that Rav Huna did not come directly to clarify the case of the Mishnah. Rather, Rav Huna came to address a contradiction that was proposed in the Beit Midrash. You hear that? Sometimes a rabbi comes, makes a comment on a Mishnah. The Mishnah makes a statement, right? The Mishnah says whatever halacha, and then comes Rabbi Simon, Rabbi Shimon, and he says, I want to explain to you what the case of the Mishnah is talking about, right? That's sometimes the style of the Gemara. And that was the text that we had before. Rav Huna comes and he clarifies for us the Mishnah, because the way of the Tana of a Mishnah, a Tana talks in a short, is not elaborate, and you need the Gemara to explain. So he comes to explain the Mishnah. But some have the text, a different text. He didn't come to say directly his comment on the words of the Mishnah directly. Rather, his comment was to address a contradiction that was brought out. Sometimes you could talk, you could say, you make a comment because, somebody said something and you clarify what somebody said without anybody asking a contradiction. You just clarify what the rabbi said. And sometimes the rabbi is saying something because he wants to answer a contradiction. And that's how the second reading of the Gemara says that some have it in that fashion. So, the 7 tefachim is the minimum that 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim. A sukkah has to be at least 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim wide, width and the length, and a height minimum of 10 tefachim high. 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim. If we're going to be strict, we'll say it's 4 inches. If we're going to be strict, and that sometimes it can work. Depends how you want to. Tefach will be in between 3 and 4 inches. If you want to say on that, in this case, we'll take it to 4 tefach, the 4 inches. So it's a minimum of 28 inches by 28 inches, and a height minimum of 40 inches. So the Ramila Mirma, some had it as a question. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, if you dug into a pile of hay, lasos lo sukkah, to make it into a sukkah, ain't a sukkah. If I have a pile of hay from the floor, from the pile is on the floor, and it's very high. And then I decide I want to make, and hay is kosher material for a sukkah, Succah, because hay originated from the ground, it's not makabel tumah, and I want to go ahead and take it, and I might dig the bottom of this pile out, and then be left with a proper sukkah. It's no good, because if I dig the bottom 10 tefachim, I didn't create the ceiling. I didn't do anything to create the ceiling. The ceiling is created by itself, and that's not kosher. I have to do an action to make it a kosher ceiling. Some had it as a question. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, we're on 16a2, on the right side. If someone digs into a pile of hay, sukkah ain't a sukkah. The Mishnah tells us it's not a sukkah. Tanya, we learned in a brisa, that it is a kosher sukkah. Amar Rav Huna, to come to Rav Huna is lo kasha. No question. It appears to be a question. I have an answer. It's not a difficulty. Kasha is like of kasha, hard. Lo kasha. It's not difficult. It's not a problem. No problemo. Here is when you have a empty space going 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim. That means you left an empty space of a tefach off the ground, from the ground up. You had a ceiling of 1 tefach, therefore you had a schach in place, and you created that ceiling. You did an action to create that ceiling, and then afterward you just dug, you raised your ceiling. But raising your ceiling by removing, I wanted to explain the following. But Rabbi, if you raise the ceiling, now automatically what became your ceiling? A new part that automatically the top became your ceiling. If I removed from 1 tefach to 10 tefachim, now, so shouldn't there be a problem that now the ceiling that's going to be, I'm using as my schach, I didn't do an action to create that ceiling? Because I just automatically, by removing from 1 tefach to 10 tefachim, automatically came that ceiling that I tapped. So why isn't that a problem that I didn't create the ceiling? Everyone hears this question. This was bothering me. You hear the question, everybody? When I go ahead and I originated made a tefach ceiling. I raised it 1 tefach off the ground, and then I went in and I kept on digging, and then later on I dug. After I made it, if I would have originally made this thing 10 tefachim off the ground to begin with, there would never be any question. It would be kosher. If I go ahead and I make this arch take a pile of hay and I make it 10 tefachim from the beginning, I created 10 tefachim, it's kosher, no problem. Here the chiddush is, originally I did not make it 10 tefachim, right? I didn't make a high pile that was off the ground 10 tefachim. What do you say? It was machine, but it was only what I made very small. Oh, what do you say, doctor? Right, when you made it, right, it was a total beauty. Right, I met all the requirements of a sukkah if I would have made it at the beginning 10 tefachim. Here I did not do that. I made it 1 tefach off the ground at the beginning. And then comes the chidush that I could even raise afterwards. I raised it another 9 tefachim higher. Now I got at least 10 tefachim off the ground. I'm good. So my question is, why isn't it a problem when I go in and I just dig from 1 tefach to 10 tefachim? So then what becomes my ceiling now? What becomes my schach? What's now that from 10 tefachim and above? But I didn't do anything now to create that. Now it's created by itself. By digging 1 to 10, I'm left with that ceiling. So why isn't that a problem that I did not create? I have to I have to make, when it was made, it wasn't, because Dr. Navid said earlier, you have a very thick schach. So the truth of the matter is, when I made it to begin with, the 1 tefach off the ground, my ceiling, my schach is not just that tefach, the first tefach, right above the first tefach, right, Max? My whole ceiling is from 1 tefach and above 1 tefach, from 1 tefach, all the way to the top of the pile of hay. I created Ralph? I created from the beginning a schach. When I placed this whole thickness of this hay from 1 tefach to 100 tefachim, it's all a ceiling, it's all schach. And it was all there to create a shade for the bottom. So since it was created, that whole pile was created as a cover. Therefore, I did the action originally to make it into a shade, a protection. Therefore, there's no problem when I go ahead and subsequently dig deep, when I raise the height from the ground to the top in that fashion, but cutting away. Rav Huna Lokasha. That's Ikadram. You can see, look at the language inside. Ikadram Lamirma. Some hissed it as a question. Nah, we learned in the Mishnah. Chot b'Gadish. Lasses a sukkah in a sukkah. If you dig into a Gadish, you dig into a pile to make it a sukkah. Ain't a sukkah. It's not a sukkah. But Tanya is a sukkah. We learned in the Bryce that it is a sukkah. Rav Huna Lokasha. Hamishisha Chalatefach. One case, it has an empty space of Tev Meshach Shiva. The other case is when you don't have that empty space. If you don't have the empty space of a tefach off the ground, and the hay is from the ground up, you never originally made a schach. You never made a cover to protect from shade. And only now, automatically, your cover is going to be made. If you start from the bottom and you dig up 10 tefachim, that cover was now made, and you didn't do anything in the action in that cover. Just it happened automatically by removing underneath of it. It doesn't make it as long as made for.
I'm in the wilderness, I'm making stack somewhere, and it's I see it's lifted off the ground by a tree. I can go and dig everything out, something by 7.
Okay, so
because I don't know what that guy's intention was. The fact that he needed 1 feet off the ground and made it for shade.
I'm saying you would have to know. You would have to know that it was done. I mean, there's no what the common way. I presume the common way that it was made. If it's commonly made for shade, that should be good. Meaning the same way if technically if you found a hut,
yeah,
and it was made, and if the hut was made for protecting from the sun, if that's what it was made from, technically it's a kosher sukkah. The question is, Tosfos might have pointed out that we say that maybe you should move a little bit of the schach, just move something of the schach to show. We had earlier a Tosfos.
This here is already made.
Right. But I'm saying, but even let's say if you find a sukkah, if a sukkah that was made by goyim, right? There is this concept. You only have to move we don't have to move the whole ceiling, because technically the ceiling was made for protecting from the sun. So that's technically a good ceiling. It's like it says Sukkah Yeshana, right? If you have an old sukkah. So Rashi says, what's an old sukkah? A hut that was built before Sukkot and not made expressly for the Yom Tov. It wasn't made specifically for the Yom Tov, but it was made for the purpose of protect as a shade. So such a thing, Beis Hillel says you could use such a thing for Sukkot, but the Yerushalmi says you have to at least do something new in honor of the holiday. You have to either move a tefach, and Rabbi Yossi says you can move. You have to move a tefach, and Rabbi Yossi says you move any amount as long as you move a small amount along the whole length or the whole width of a sukkah. So technically, it's kosher schach if it was already made by somebody else, as long as it was made for us, and you wouldn't have to move the whole thing around. In that case, if you found it pre-made, but it was made for shade, then it could be just to move a tefach by a tefach, to move, let's say, 4 inches by 4 inches. But who knows what talking about? Yes, I'm saying in that case that you're talking about, if you found somebody else made this arch, and if it's made, I presume it would depend if what's the usual make of the item. If it's usually made, there's certain things that are made for shade and certain things that are not made for shade. You would have to, I would think you would have to know that it's a type that's commonly made for shade. That's what I would think. And you might need to go ahead and move a little bit, a tefach by a tefach in that item. Okay. You see,
digging it out to get to the 7 is not adequate enough.
And you had already 7 by 7, but you want to dig it out to make it 10 tvachim high.
Let's say you make it whatever, biggest size, perfect size, just best area. Okay. When digging it out is not considered doing something.
What was the case? You found a tefach above the ground?
Because you're saying, okay, you could use it. Let's say yes,
It was used for shade.
And I'm going to make it into more seconds. You there, go in it for 2 days that I want to be in this area. I dig it out. Is the idea of digging it out considered moving the stuff, taking the stuff?
Digging out, I don't think would be considered shaking the schach.
How do you shake the stuff?
You take the hay and you move it. You pick up the hay and then put it, because the hay is your schach. Just move some of the hay, and that would be considered. Okay, now we're going to go to the Mishnah. We touched on the Mishnah yesterday, but we'll go a little review today. Hamishal, we are Tez Zayin and Aleph in the Art Scroll. It's 16a2. A little review never hurt anybody, right? And not everybody that's sitting here today was here yesterday. Good morning. Hamishal shall defanot maila lamata. An amazing Mishnah where you're talking about if you made the walls of a sukkah, you started high up and you worked from your way down, from above to down. So you went ahead and let's say you made a wall, 10 tfachim wall, which is the size of a wall, but you started above. Let's say if this would be the ground, I started above ground, and I went, but the wall did. Now, how far down did this wall come? Did the wall come all the way down to the ground, or the wall is above the ground? And that's going to be the whole question here in the Mishnah. If I made a wall, the Mishnah seems to indicate the Mishnah seems to indicate that you don't have to only build a wall starting from the ground and building the wall up. If you started building the wall above, and then you made your way from above and ground, that also would form that's also a kosher wall. You went, but it all depends how far off the ground are you. Is the wall suspended in midair? Is the wall off the ground? And if it is, how much off the ground is the wall, right? If you're making the wall from above down, if the wall is higher than the ground 3 tvachim, that means you left the space under the wall, that the wall is enough 3 tvachim, between 9 and 12 inches of the empty space, so that invalidates the wall. It's not a kosher wall, according to this opinion of the Mishnah. A suspended wall doesn't work if it's 3 tvachim or off the ground. If it's within 3 tvachim, then we look at it as if it's already closed, like lavud. We consider that as if it's closed. If you make a wall starting from ground up, if the wall is 10 tvachim high, it's kosher, even though the wall doesn't extend to the schach. You don't need the wall. The Mishnah, according to the Mishnah, you don't need the wall to go all the way up to the schach, as long as you have a wall of 10 tvachim high, and the schach is directly above that wall. Even though there's a space between, I heard in Israel they make a lot of sukkot like that, right? I heard in Israel there's a lot of sukkot that the wall does not go up to the. In America, we don't see this really. I don't see people making such sukkot. It's not commonly made. A sukkah that the wall doesn't go up to the schach. But I think someone told me in Israel it's very common. We're going to look more into the halacha as we go. That they make walls, and then there's a space between the wall and the schach. The schach directly above that wall. And here the Mishnah states that it is good. As long as you have a 10 tefach wall, the wall is 10 tefach, the fact that it doesn't go all the way up to the sukkah, to the schach, the Mishnah states is not a problem. Im gavoa asar tvachim k'sheira. It is kosher. Rabbi Yossi comes and he says a very big chidush. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Keshem shelamayla mata l'mayla asar tvachim. Just like you say that it doesn't have to extend to the schach. If you have a wall that starts over here on the ground and goes up 10 tvachim, doesn't have to reach the schach, we consider it as if we can still consider it a proper wall. If you go ahead and you go from above in the ground and you have it 3 tvachim off the ground, it's suspended in midair, a wall is a wall. It doesn't make a difference if it's suspended. The fact that there is space underneath will not invalidate the wall. What do you want to say, Dr. Navid?
It doesn't say about the space on the bottom. It says as long as the wall is 10
But what does he come to say? He's coming to argue on the previous rabbi, right? Now look at the Rashi. Rashi addresses your point. Look at Rashi. Kach milmayla lamata. You have the Rashi, the last Rashi on the Mishnah. The right side, above where it says Gemara, Rashi says, Dayo bariga hasara. It's enough if you're going from above to down to weave a wall of 10 tvachim. Even if that wall is much higher, elevated than the ground. The wall that you're going from above down is still very elevated off the ground. Keshera, kosher. And Rashi says, why? Savar, mechitza tluya asara materet. A hanging wall, Simon, that's suspended in midair, as long as it's the size of a kosher wall, 10 tefach wall, it's a 28-inch, let's say we'll take the stricter opinion, 20 in that case, 28-inch wall at the height, 40 inches. 10 tefach times 4 inches, it will be strict, between 3 and 4 inches, we'll say it's 40-inch height wall, with almost 3.5 feet. It's kosher, even though it's many tefachim off the ground. Let's say the ground is over here, the wall goes up to here. Let's say 3, and let's say the wall starts from here, right? The wall, and it goes 10 tefachim high, and then you have schach. Now, if this is more than 3 tefachim off the ground, 3 tefachim is 9 or 12 inches. It's much more than 9 or 12 inches, and the wall only extends to here. You have this whole space, whole spaces on the bottom. He says it's good. Okay, it's time for davening. Beautiful Gemara. I think we clarified today. I think the hey, very good. I think Baruch Hashem. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Batesh gave us a thumbs up. Thank you, Mr. Batesh. We like that. And we love the smile. Ralph, we love the smile. Rabbi Friedman loves when he sees people smiling. I can't hear you. Okay, have a good Shabbat. I still don't hear you, Mr. Patesh. Ellie, thank you for being here.
How about now?
Now I hear you, Mr. Ralph. Keep on smiling.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. You too.
Bye-bye.
We're Jews. We're supposed to, Shrina, we should be so happy. Take care. All